Hey guys, tonight we're taking a truly unappetizing journey back to the bustling, grand, yet often surprisingly grim kitchens and dining rooms of the Roman Empire. Forget the romanticized images of elegant feasts, sophisticated banquets, and culinary extravagance enjoyed by toga-clad elites. You're about to discover why ancient Roman food was awful for the vast majority of its population, and even for some of the wealthy. This wasn't about gastronomic delight or varied nutrition. It was a relentless, day in, day out grind for sheer sustenance, often plagued by monotony, grit, and the ever-present threat of contamination. Frankly, you probably wouldn't survive the first week on this diet without longing for a modern fast food meal, let alone an entire lifetime. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from? And what time is it for you right now? Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself suddenly standing in a bustling, often grimy, Roman city, perhaps Ostia, the port of Rome, or a large provincial town. Sometime around the 1st or 2nd century CE, the air is thick with the pervasive smell of wood smoke, human sweat, animal waste, and an underlying aroma of stale grain. You glance around, noticing the packed tenement buildings, the narrow streets, and the constant flow of people. You are a common Roman citizen, a plebeian, or perhaps even a slave, and your life is primarily defined by the relentless pursuit of basic sustenance. Your first thought, as always, is about your next meal and the grim reality of the staples that form the very foundation of your diet grains. Gruel and pervasive grime, the absolute bedrock of the ancient Roman diet for the vast majority of its population, was grain. This wasn't the refined, fluffy white bread or sweet pastries you might enjoy today. This was coarse, heavy, and often barely digestible stuff, primarily made from wheat or barley for the common Roman. Particularly in the early centuries of the empire, the staple was often a form of porridge or gruel, known as pulse or pulmentum. This was a thick, viscous mush, its consistency varying wildly depending on the amount of grain and water available, made by simply boiling coarse grains with water. There would be no sugar, no added flavors beyond a pinch of salt if affordable and available, and certainly no fresh milk or butter for richness for most common folk. It was bland, often watery, and designed purely for caloric sustenance, a necessary fuel for the long, arduous day ahead, whether you were laboring in the fields, working in a workshop, or serving in a bustling household. Imagine starting your day with something that tasted like bland, gritty wallpaper paste, knowing it was your primary meal. It truly sucked to have your breakfast be a punishment. Your bread panis wouldn't be much better. While Romans did bake bread, it was typically a heavy, dark loaf, often made from coarse whole grain flour. It was dense, hard, and would quickly go stale, becoming almost impossible to chew without first soaking it in water, wine, or a bit of olive oil if you were lucky. The common bread of the poor, known as panis sordidus, dirty bread, was often made from the cheapest, least refined flour, sometimes mixed with bran or even other fillers to stretch the precious grain. Imagine chewing on something akin to a dense, flavorless brick that constantly scraped your mouth. It truly sucked to eat bread that was tougher than your sandals. The most insidious aspect of this grain-heavy diet, largely unacknowledged by the Romans themselves, was the pervasive presence of grit and grime in your food. The primary method for grinding grain into flour involved querns, large millstones, often operated manually by slaves or animals. These primitive grinding methods, however efficient for their time, meant that the flour almost always contained significant amounts of tiny stone particles, sand, and other abrasive impurities chipped from the millstones themselves. Every bite of your daily bread, every spoonful of your gruel, brought these abrasive particles directly into your mouth. This constant ingestion of grit led to severe and relentless dental wear attrition. Imagine chewing on something akin to fine sandpaper with every meal, day in and day out. For decades, your tooth enamel, the hard outer layer of your teeth, would be slowly but surely ground down, eroding to expose the softer, more sensitive dentin beneath. Once the enamel was gone, bacteria could more easily penetrate, accelerating the formation and progression of cavities caries. These cavities would bore deeper and deeper into the tooth, exposing the sensitive pulp and nerves, leading to agonizing, persistent pain that would consume your entire existence, making eating, drinking, or even speaking an ordeal. Imagine the constant, throbbing agony in your jaw, the dull ache radiating through your head, that made sleep impossible and basic daily tasks unbearable. It truly sucked to have your mouth be a constant source of agony, slowly being eaten away by your own food. The Roman diet for the common person was heavily reliant on this trio of grains, gruel and grit. Vegetables, though present, were often seasonal and limited. Meat was scarce, and dairy products were often consumed in fermented forms. This fundamental reliance on grain, providing calories but little else in terms of variety or optimal nutrition, made your diet incredibly monotonous and set the stage for chronic health problems that would plague your short, arduous life. The monotony of flavor was a constant misery. Your food would be seasoned, if at all, with locally gathered salt or perhaps a few basic, pungent herbs. The vast array of exotic spices, pepper, cinnamon, cloves were incredibly expensive imports, largely reserved for the wealthy elite, as explored in Why Roman Banquets Were an Awful, Gluttonous Ordeal. Chapter 3. So your palate was confined to the earthy, often bland taste of coarse grains, fermented products, and minimally seasoned vegetables. There were no complex sauces, no intricate cooking techniques beyond boiling or simple baking. Imagine the sheer, soul-crushing boredom of eating essentially the same bland meal, day after day, week after week, for years. It truly sucked to live in a world devoid of culinary joy. The psychological toll of such a monotonous diet would be immense. Eating is not just about physical fuel, it's about enjoyment, social bonding, and a psychological break from the daily grind for the common Roman. Mealtimes were functional, a grim necessity, rather than a pleasurable experience. The constant repetition of flavors and textures, the knowledge that every meal would be essentially the same as the last, would lead to palate fatigue and a deep-seated boredom with food. Even when your stomach ached with hunger, this pervasive culinary monotony was a silent, insidious misery that added to the hardships of daily life. One common misconception is that all ancient Roman food was universally luxurious and delicious, as depicted in some historical fiction. In reality, the extravagant feasts described by Roman authors like Petronius were enjoyed exclusively by the very wealthy elite, representing a tiny fraction of the population. The vast majority of Romans, the common plebeians and slaves, ate a much simpler, more basic, and often quite poor diet centered on grains, vegetables, and legumes, with meat being a rare luxury. The archaeological evidence, including analysis of human skeletal remains, which show widespread tooth wear, consistently supports this distinction between the diets of the rich and the poor. Historians still meticulously study Roman dietary texts, G. Varro's De Re Rustica on agriculture, Apicius's cookbook for the elite, and countless references in poetry and prose, as well as archaeological findings from various Roman sites, remnants of food in refuse pits. Analysis of dental ware, patterns on skeletons to understand the precise dietary habits and nutritional status of different social classes, consistently confirming that the diet of the masses was largely monotonous and often abrasive. Furthermore, the very act of preparing your food added to the grind. For many households, particularly in rural areas, you would be responsible for grinding your own grain, a tedious and physically demanding task, adding hours of labor to your already full day. The lack of modern kitchen tools and efficient cooking methods meant that even simple meals required significant effort and time, further diminishing any pleasure derived from eating. Your food was hard to get, hard to prepare, and hard to eat. The nutritional implications of this diet were also significant. While providing calories, it could be deficient in certain essential vitamins and minerals, particularly if fresh produce was scarce or if the diet lacked sufficient varied proteins. This could contribute to chronic malnutrition, general weakness, and a compromised immune system, making you susceptible to various diseases, further shortening your already precarious lifespan. Your diet, while keeping you alive, was also slowly breaking your body down. So, your daily life in ancient Rome, for the vast majority of its population, was defined by the staples of grains, gruel, and pervasive grime. Your reliance on coarse, gritty grain, consumed as bland porridge or tough bread, provided basic sustenance but relentlessly destroyed your teeth and offered little culinary joy. This pervasive monotony, coupled with the hidden dangers of abrasive food, was the first and most foundational aspect of why ancient Roman food was awful, having endured the pervasive grit and monotony of your staple diet. Your Roman culinary journey immediately brought you to its most infamous and often repulsive characteristic sauces and seasonings, particularly garum and its unspeakable stench. Forget subtle flavors and delicate aromas. Your meals were drenched in pungent ferments and aggressive spices, making your daily food consumption profoundly awful. Imagine sitting down for almost any meal in ancient Rome. Whether you were a plebeian sharing a simple meal or a wealthy citizen at a banquet, as explored in Why Roman Banquets Were an Awful, Gluttonous Ordeal. Chapter 3. Your food would almost certainly be accompanied by, if not swimming in, garum garon. This wasn't merely a popular condiment, it was the ubiquitous, defining flavor of Roman cuisine. An all-purpose seasoning used in almost every savory dish, much like salt or pepper is today, but with a far more potent and unsettling origin. It truly sucked to have your ketchup be rotten fish. Garum was a fermented fish sauce, made from the guts and blood of fish, often mackerel, tuna, or anchovies mixed with salt, and left to ferment in the sun for weeks or months. Imagine large, open vats sitting under the scorching Mediterranean sun, filled with fish entrails, blood, and salt, slowly putrefying and liquefying. The smell emanating from these garum factories, known as ceteriae, was famously overpowering and incredibly foul, capable of permeating entire towns downwind. It was a stench of decaying fish, pungent and nauseating, a smell that even ancient Romans themselves acknowledged was horrific. Imagine living near a garum factory, constantly assaulted by the pervasive odor of rotting fish, or simply getting a whiff from a passing cart. It truly sucked to live in a perpetually stinky city The garum itself came in various qualities, from the highly prized, expensive liquamen, finer, clearer fish sauce used by the wealthy, to coarser, cheaper versions consumed by the masses. Regardless of quality, its flavor profile was intensely umami, savory, and aggressively salty, with a distinctive, often fishy, pungency. This wasn't a subtle enhancer, it was a dominant flavor that could mask other, perhaps less fresh ingredients. You would use it liberally on almost everything, as a condiment drizzled directly onto bread, vegetables, or roasted meats. In sauces, a primary ingredient in countless Roman sauces, stews, and dressings, giving them a pervasive, salty, umami kick. In cooking, used in everything from everyday meals to elaborate banquet dishes, often mixed with wine, oil, or herbs. Imagine every dish you consumed being infused with this aggressive, fishy flavor. Your porridge, your vegetables, your simple meats all would carry the unmistakable taste and odor of a fermented fish. For a modern palate, accustomed to more varied and delicate seasonings, this pervasive, pungent flavor would be incredibly monotonous and often quite repulsive. It truly sucked to have everything taste like rotten fish. Beyond garum, others strong, often clashing. Seasonings and spices were used, particularly in wealthier Roman households, but their use often aimed for intensity rather than harmony of flavor. Imported spices like pepper piper, cumin, coriander, saffron, and silphium apprised. Now extinct, herb were incredibly expensive. When used, they were often applied in large quantities, creating intensely flavored, sometimes overwhelming, dishes that mask the original taste of the ingredients, Roman cooking. Particularly for the elite, often favored complex, heavily spiced combinations that, to a modern palate, might seem bizarre or even unpalatable. Imagine eating a dish with every spice thrown in, all at once. Without any balance, it really sucked to have your food be a flavor assault. The purpose of such intense seasoning was multifaceted. Preservation. Heavy, salting as in garum, and liberal use of spices could help mask the taste of slightly spoiled food in an age without refrigeration or contribute to its preservation, masking poor quality. Strong flavors could disguise ingredients that were not entirely fresh or of the highest quality. A common issue in a vast empire with limited food transport. Display of wealth, using expensive. Imported spices was a clear way for the wealthy to flaunt their status and exotic tastes. Regardless of how truly palatable the resulting dish might be, flavor enhancement, while aggressive, garum did provide a powerful umami base that could enhance the flavor of otherwise bland grains or vegetables, reflecting a different culinary sensibility. The pervasive smell of garum itself would also be a constant in Roman towns, particularly near markets or production sites. It was a smell that Romans were accustomed to, but one that foreign visitors often found deeply offensive, much like the smell of Roman latrines or crowded city streets. This distinct odor was an inescapable part of the Roman sensory landscape. One common misconception is that all ancient Roman food was universally delicious, or that they had highly sophisticated taste palates by modern standards. While Roman cuisine was diverse and complex, especially for the elite as evidenced by Apicius's cookbook, their widespread reliance on garum as a universal seasoning, their preference for intense and often clashing flavors, and their use of ingredients that mask freshness, often created dishes that would be quite unappealing to a modern palate. The Roman appreciation for strong flavors from fermented products. Pungent herbs differed significantly from many modern culinary sensibilities. Historians still meticulously study Roman culinary texts like Apicius's De Re Coquinaria. Archaeological findings of food, remnants ages from Pompeii and Herculaneum kitchens. Analyzing residues in cooking pots, And Roman philosophical satirical commentaries, Seneca's critiques of luxury, Martial's epigrams mocking certain foods to understand the precise ingredients, preparation methods, and prevalent flavor profiles of Roman cuisine, confirming the ubiquitous and often intense nature of garum and strong spices. Furthermore, the very act of eating with fingers as opposed to modern forks, which were not common in a garum-soaked meal, meant that your hands would constantly be covered in the pungent, sticky sauce, while servants would provide water for hand washing between courses at banquets. The pervasive smell and residue would inevitably cling to you, adding to the general sense of being perpetually sticky and slightly odorous. This tactile and olfactory reality further contributed to the distinct unpleasantness of Roman dining. Even for the wealthy, the psychological toll of consuming such a monotonous and aggressively flavored diet would be immense. You would perpetually experience palate fatigue, finding your food unappetizing despite its sustenance. The constant exposure to the pungent odor of garum, both in your food and in the air, would be a daily assault on your senses, dulling your appreciation for other aromas. This pervasive culinary monotony and sensory discomfort contributed to a pervasive sense of tedium and dissatisfaction, making every meal a grim necessity rather than a moment of pleasure. Your taste buds were constantly under assault. The use of specific spices also highlighted economic disparities. While you, the common Roman, might get basic garum, the very wealthy used incredibly expensive imported spices as a visible display of their status. The subtle class divide, evident even in the flavor of your food, underscored the pervasive social stratification of Roman society. Your diet was a constant reminder of your place in the social hierarchy. The very process of producing garum itself, with its foul odors and unsanitary conditions in the factories, added a layer of hidden misery to its consumption. While you might not directly witness its production, the knowledge of its origins, or the pervasive smell of a nearby factory, would permeate your consciousness, making its constant presence in your diet even more unappetizing. A constant reminder of its industrial, gruesome origins. So, your daily food in ancient Rome was profoundly awful because of its pervasive sauces and seasonings, particularly garum and its unspeakable stench. This ubiquitous fermented fish sauce, combined with other aggressive spices, created an intensely pungent, often repulsive, and profoundly monotonous flavor profile that dominated almost every dish. This constant sensory assault, making your food both unappetizing and undeniably smelly, was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of the Roman diet, ensuring that your pursuit of nourishment was a constant battle against culinary disgust. Having settled into the uncomfortable opulence of the triclinium and begun your sensory assault by garum, your Roman culinary experience continued its perplexing display with meat. Forget abundant, fresh cuts, meat was often scarce, stringy, and frequently masked by aggressive spices, making your meals profoundly awful. Imagine the rarity of fresh meat on your plate, particularly if you were a common Roman citizen or a slave. While the wealthy elite certainly consumed meat, especially at lavish banquets, the staple diet for the vast majority of the population was primarily vegetarian, based on grains, legumes, and vegetables. Livestock like cattle, sheep, and pigs were incredibly valuable alive for their milk, wool, labor, and breeding. Slaughters were often seasonal, typically in autumn to avoid feeding animals through the lean winter, or reserved for special occasions and religious sacrifices. This meant that daily access to fresh meat was a luxury few could afford. It truly sucked to be a meat-starved Roman, When meat was available, it was often tough and stringy. Without modern butchering techniques or tenderizing methods, meat could be incredibly tough and difficult to chew. Imagine gnawing on a piece of boiled beef that felt like leather. Its texture, as challenging as its flavor, was bland or overpowering. The primitive tools for cooking boiling. Simple roasting further contributed to its toughness, as slow cooking methods for tenderizing were not always practical for daily meals preserved for long-term storage. Meat was predominantly salted or dried. Imagine consuming heavily salted pork or beef day after day. While this preserved the meat, it also made it intensely salty, requiring extensive soaking before consumption. Even after soaking, the pervasive saltiness would dominate the flavor, contributing to a constant thirst and a profound monotony of taste. Dried meat, like jerky, was incredibly tough and offered little culinary pleasure, if not preserved perfectly. It could also begin to spoil, necessitating heavy spicing to mask its off flavor, masked by spices and garum. To combat the toughness, the saltiness, or the faint rancidity of preserved meat, Roman cooks, particularly those for the elite, would often use aggressive and abundant spices, pepper, cumin, coriander, and, of course, copious amounts of garum. These strong flavors were used not just for enhancement, but to actively mask the less desirable qualities of the meat itself. Imagine trying to discern the original taste of a piece of mutton when it's drenched in fermented fish sauce and heavily seasoned with every spice imaginable. The result was often an overwhelming, clashing flavor profile that disguised more than it complemented. It truly sucked to have your meat taste like a spice cabinet threw up. Even the types of meat considered delicacies by the wealthy might seem unappetizing to a modern palate. Dormice, often fattened on nuts and honey and then roasted, were a common delicacy, served as an appetizer. Sow's udder, often stuffed, was another prized dish, while a display of exotic taste and wealth. The thought of consuming these items might cause a modern stomach to churn. Highlighting a significant difference in culinary preferences, the scarcity of fat from meat was also a constant challenge for the common Roman. While olive oil was widely used in the Mediterranean diet, animal fats like lard or tallow from regularly slaughtered animals were less common for the poor. This lack of rich, satisfying fats meant meals often felt less fulfilling and lacked the caloric density that fats provide, contributing to a feeling of less than optimal health and energy. Your body, constantly engaged in labor, would perpetually crave these vital nutrients that were rarely supplied by your meager diet. The preparation of meat also presented challenges. Without modern butchering techniques, and often with crude tools, obtaining clean cuts of meat was difficult. The waste offal, bones, gristle was often incorporated into communal stews or fed to animals. Reflecting the need to waste nothing from such a precious commodity, one common misconception is that all ancient Roman elites constantly gorged on vast quantities of roasted meats. While large meat dishes were central to extravagant banquets, as discussed in the episode Why Roman Banquets Were an Awful, Gluttonous Ordeal, daily consumption of meat, even for the wealthy, was often more moderate. The sheer scale of meat dishes described in satirical texts like Petronius's Satyricon represents extreme indulgence rather than a universal norm. For the vast majority of the Roman population, meat was a rare treat, and their diet was predominantly vegetarian, reflecting the realities of limited animal husbandry and the high cost of animal protein. Historians still meticulously study archaeological findings of faunal remains, animal bones from refuse pits. Compare them with Roman agricultural texts, e.g. Columella's De Re Rustica, and analyze human skeletal remains. Jadji Mayak stable isotope analysis to infer protein sources to understand the precise prevalence and types of meat consumed by different social classes in ancient Rome, consistently confirming that common diets were low in meat. Furthermore, the very act of consuming meat when it was available would often be done with a sense of its preciousness, making every bite a reminder of its rarity. You wouldn't take it for granted. You would savor every tough, salty, garum-drenched morsel, knowing it was a vital source of strength for your body. However unappetizing its flavor, this inherent valuing of scarce resources, regardless of palatability, highlighted the brutal realities of their diet. The nutritional implications of this meat scarcity were significant. A diet low in animal protein, while providing carbohydrates from grains, could lead to subtle nutritional deficiencies, muscle weakness, and wasting. Essential amino acids found in meat are crucial for muscle development and repair. A consistent lack would leave you less robust and more fatigued. Iron deficiency anemia. Red meat is a prime source of easily absorbable iron. Its scarcity would lead to widespread anemia, causing chronic fatigue, weakness, and a weakened immune system, leaving you constantly tired and susceptible to illness. Lack of certain B vitamins. Meat provides vital B vitamins like B12, crucial for energy metabolism and nervous system function. Deficiencies could lead to neurological issues and overall malaise. This pervasive lack of sufficient, high-quality meat contributed directly to the general physical weakness and lower overall health of the common Roman population, making them more susceptible to disease and injury. Your body was perpetually fighting a hidden battle against nutritional inadequacy, slowly being worn down by a diet that kept you alive, but rarely truly thrived. So, your daily food in ancient Rome was profoundly awful because meat was scarce, often stringy, heavily preserved, and aggressively masked by pungent flavors. The rarity of fresh cuts, the pervasive saltiness or toughness of preserved options, and the preference for bizarre, strong seasonings turned this vital protein source into a challenging, often unpalatable, and ultimately unsatisfactory part of your diet. This persistent culinary disappointment, making every mouthful a struggle, was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of ancient Roman food. Even as your body struggled with the toughness of meager meat and the omnipresent stench of garum, your Roman diet was perpetually defined by a profound lack of variety in its plant-based components. Forget farmers' markets or endless aisles of fresh produce. Vegetables and fruits were often seasonally scarce and limited in diversity, making your daily meals profoundly awful. Imagine your primary sources of sustenance from the plant kingdom. For the vast majority of Romans, the common plebeians and slaves, your daily intake of fruits and vegetables was far from the vibrant, year-round abundance we enjoy today. Your access was severely constrained by climate, agricultural practices, and the rudimentary nature of food preservation. Vegetables, while a significant part of the Roman diet, especially for the poor, were often limited in variety. Your diet would largely revolve around a few hardy, common staples that grew well in the Mediterranean climate or could be easily stored. These included cabbage, onions, garlic, leeks, radishes, turnips, parsnips, and various legumes like lentils, chickpeas, and beans. Imagine eating boiled cabbage or a bland lentil stew, day after day, week after week, while nutritious. The sheer monotony of these few options would be soul-crushing, turning the act of eating into a joyless chore. Seasonal fresh vegetables were primarily available only during their specific growing seasons. During the summer and autumn, you might enjoy a greater variety of fresh greens and root vegetables, but as winter approached, these fresh sources would disappear. You would then rely solely on stored, often meager, supplies of root vegetables, dried legumes, or coarse greens, which would have lost much of their flavor, texture, and nutritional value during storage. Imagine eating shriveled, tasteless turnips for months on end. It truly sucked to have your salad be just old roots. Often cooked to mush, vegetables were frequently boiled into pottages or stews for long periods, often losing much of their texture and vibrant flavor. The goal was sustenance, not culinary finesse. Fruits were an even rarer luxury, especially for the common Roman. Seasonal availability, fresh fruits like grapes, figs, apples, pears, plums, and cherries were strictly seasonal. You would only enjoy them during their short growing periods. Limited access. While wild fruits might be foraged, cultivated orchards were often the property of wealthy landowners, and their prime produce would be destined for the high tables of the elite or for sale at high prices. For you, getting your hands on truly fresh, ripe fruit would be a rare treat, a fleeting burst of sweetness and vitamins. Preservation issues when available. Fruits might be dried like figs or dates, which were common or made into preserves with honey. But these methods often altered flavor and texture, and did not fully retain all nutrients. This consistent lack of fresh, diverse fruits and vegetables led to profound and pervasive nutritional deficiencies that systematically weakened your body and shortened your lifespan. Vitamin C deficiency scurvy. This was a terrifying, common killer. Without consistent access to fresh produce, you were highly susceptible to scurvy. Imagine your gums bleeding, your teeth loosening, old wounds reopening and refusing to heal, your limbs swelling painfully, and a profound, debilitating fatigue setting in. Your body would slowly, agonizingly, disintegrate from the inside out. Scurvy was a widespread misery, often without understanding its cause. It truly sucked to literally rot from the inside out because you couldn't get an orange. Vitamin A deficiency found in many colorful vegetables. Vitamin A is crucial for vision. Its scarcity could lead to night blindness, difficulty seeing in low light, or, in severe cases, more profound vision problems. Fiber deficiency. The lack of fresh, unprocessed plant matter could contribute to chronic digestive issues like constipation, which would be extremely uncomfortable and could lead to other health problems. General malnutrition. Your diet, while providing some calories from grains, often lack the broader spectrum of micronutrients that a diverse diet offers. This contributed to overall physical weakness, a compromised immune system, and increased susceptibility to infectious diseases, as we'll discuss in Chapter 9. Your body was perpetually fighting a hidden hunger, slowly breaking down from within. Even if you weren't actively starving, the psychological toll of this monotonous and nutritionally inadequate diet would be immense. You would perpetually experience palate fatigue, finding your food unappetizing despite its sustenance. The constant craving for fresh flavors, for the vibrancy of diverse fruits and vegetables, would gnaw at your spirit. The physical symptoms of deficiencies, fatigue, aches, and general malaise would add to your misery, leading to a pervasive sense of weariness and dissatisfaction with your daily existence. Imagine living a life where food was merely files, devoid of joy or variety. One common misconception is that all Roman citizens enjoyed a rich and varied diet, given the vastness of the empire. In reality, while exotic produce and rare fruits were brought to Rome, they were astronomically expensive and reserved for the tables of the wealthiest elite, who represented a tiny fraction of the population. The vast majority of Romans, particularly the urban poor and rural peasants, ate a much more basic, localized, and seasonally constrained diet. Archaeological findings from refuse pits in Roman plebeian dwellings and analysis of skeletal remains which show signs of nutritional deficiencies consistently confirm this stark dietary divide and the limited access to diverse, fresh produce for the common Roman. Historians still meticulously study Roman agricultural treatises Cato the Elder's De Agricultura, dietary discussions in Roman literature, Pliny the Elder's Natural History on Plants, and archaeological findings of plant remains about from Pompey's shops and gardens to understand the precise types, availability, and consumption patterns of fruits and vegetables across different social strata, consistently revealing a constrained and often monotonous plant-based diet for the masses. Furthermore, the lack of effective food preservation techniques for fresh produce compounded the scarcity. Unlike grains that could be stored or dried, vegetables and fruits were incredibly difficult to preserve effectively for long periods without modern methods. This meant that any fresh produce acquired had to be consumed quickly before it spoiled, making it impossible to store vitamins and minerals for the lean winter months. This contributed directly to the pervasive and chronic nutritional deficiencies, trapping you in a cycle of seasonal deprivation. The very visual and sensory experience of your meals would be bleak. Your plate would be dominated by dull browns and greens from cooked grains and root vegetables, lacking the bright colors and fresh textures that would stimulate your appetite. This absence of sensory appeal further diminished the pleasure of eating, turning every meal into a grim necessity rather than a moment of culinary satisfaction. The economic constraints also played a major role. For the common Roman, purchasing imported or out-of-season produce was simply impossible due to cost. Your diet was determined by what you could grow locally or what was cheaply available in the market, further limiting your choices and exacerbating the monotony. Your poverty dictated your diet's inadequacy. So your daily food in ancient Rome was profoundly awful because vegetables and fruits were seasonally scarce and limited in diversity. The lack of fresh produce led to devastating nutritional deficiencies like scurvy and chronic malnutrition, while the monotonous repetition of a few common staples created culinary tedium. This pervasive dietary inadequacy, consuming your body from within and offering little culinary joy, was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of the Roman diet for the masses. Even as your body struggled with the squalor of roadside inns and the dangers of contaminated food, your life on a Roman road trip was a constant, terrifying dance with human and animal predators. Forget peaceful journeys. Bandits and beasts lurked at every turn, making every mile a perilous gamble for your goods, your freedom, and your very life. Thus profoundly sucked. Imagine the pervasive anxiety that settled over you with every turn in the road, every dense patch of forest, every desolate stretch of plain. While the Roman Empire was vast and its roads generally safer than in other ancient empires, stretches of them, particularly in remote provinces, mountainous regions, or areas affected by war, were still rife with human predators. You were a wealthy merchant if carrying goods, or a respectable citizen if traveling for leisure or business, making you an irresistible target in a world where wealth was concentrated and easy prey was sought. Your very presence, with your carriage and your goods, marked you as a target. It truly sucked to be a walking target. Human predators were the most immediate and terrifying threat, far outnumbering any wild animals. Bandits, latrons, these were desperate outlaws, often former soldiers, displaced peasants, or simply opportunistic criminals. They would lurk in narrow defiles, hidden valleys, dense forests, or behind large rocks or sand dunes, waiting for the perfect moment to ambush unsuspecting travelers. Their tactics were brutal and swift. They would typically strike with overwhelming force. using bows, slings, javelins, and swords to quickly incapacitate your guards if you had any, or simply terrify your retinue into submission. Imagine the sudden chaos arrows raining down, the shouts of attackers, the panicked cries of your animals, and the clang of steel as your few armed escorts desperately tried to form a defense. Your heart would pound with raw terror, knowing that your life and your fortune hung precariously in the balance, a desperate fight for survival against ruthless, armed men. Consequences of a bandit attack. If your group was overwhelmed and defeated, the consequences were dire and often brutal. Robbery. This was the primary goal. All your precious goods, whether silk, wine, grain, or personal valuables, would be brutally seized. Your entire investment, your years of effort, and your family's future could vanish in an instant, leaving you utterly destitute, far from home, with no means of support. Violence and injury resistance would be met with brutal force. You might be severely beaten, stabbed, cut, or maimed, left for dead by the roadside. Bandits were not always interested in killing quickly. They often inflicted injuries to incapacitate or to teach a brutal lesson. Imagine the searing pain of a sword slash, or the crushing blow of a club, knowing that proper medical care was days away and infection was a near certainty. Kidnapping and ransom. If you were a particularly wealthy or prominent individual, you might be kidnapped and held for ransom. Your captors, often ruthless and desperate, would send messages to your family or business partners demanding immense sums for your release. This could lead to a prolonged, terrifying captivity, marked by starvation, torture, and the constant fear that your family might not be able to pay, leading to your eventual execution. Imagine being chained in a dark, foul-smelling cave, constantly fearing for your life. Your only hope, the distant, uncertain promise of ransom that might never come. It really sucked to be worth more dead than alive. Enslavement. For many, especially if you were a common traveler or a less wealthy merchant, capture meant outright enslavement. You would be sold into the brutal slave markets of the empire, your freedom irrevocably stripped away. Your life would be reduced to forced labor in mines, fields, or quarries, a commodity to be bought and sold. With no hope of return to your former life, imagine going from a free citizen or merchant to a piece of property overnight, destined for a life of toil and misery. Beyond common bandits, entire regions of the Silk Road might be unstable due to local conflicts, civil unrest, or renegade soldiers, in areas affected by ongoing warfare or where imperial authority was weak. You might face unauthorized tolls, arbitrary arrests, or even direct attacks from disgruntled local militias or deserting legionaries. This pervasive lawlessness, this constant threat from armed men and volatile local authorities, created an atmosphere of profound insecurity. Turning supposedly safe routes into battlegrounds, it truly sucked to be caught in someone else's war. Then there were the beasts of the wild, adding another layer of primal fear and unpredictable danger. Large predators. Roman roads often traversed through dense forests, along rugged mountain ranges, or across sparsely populated plains, which were still home to various wild animals, while direct attacks on large. Organized travel groups were rare. Smaller groups or lone travelers could fall prey to wolves, bears, wild boars, or even large cats in more remote regions. Imagine the chilling sound of howling wolves as dusk settled. Knowing your crude roadside camp offered little protection. Venomous creatures in arid and rocky environments, deserts, foothills, scorpions, and venomous snakes posed a constant, hidden threat. A single bite could lead to agonizing pain, severe illness, paralysis, or even death without proper antivenom, which was non-existent in ancient times. Imagine being bitten in the middle of the night, your body racked with pain and fever, far from any help, knowing your life hung on a prayer and the slim chance of your body fighting off the poison. Packs of wild dogs, abandoned or feral dogs, often starving and aggressive, could roam in dangerous packs, posing a threat to both travelers and their livestock. These were not mere nuisances. They could be fierce and relentless. The lack of centralized law enforcement and security across the vast stretches of the Roman Empire meant you were largely on your own. While Roman legions maintained order in their immediate garrisons and on major strategic routes, viae militaris, vast stretches between them were often lawless, offering little to no protection from these human and animal predators. Your safety depended entirely on the strength of your armed guards, the vigilance of your companions, the cunning of your guides, and sheer, unpredictable luck. This pervasive lawlessness, this constant threat from armed men and wild animals, created an atmosphere of profound insecurity, making true relaxation impossible. It truly sucked to be your own security force. Always. One common misconception is that the Roman Empire's vast road network made travel perfectly safe. While Rome indeed brought unprecedented stability and security to many regions compared to earlier periods, banditry and other dangers persisted, particularly in remote areas during times of political instability or when imperial control was less direct. The very act of concentrating wealth on roads made merchants attractive targets. The Roman state did deploy stationary road police and military garrisons, but their coverage was not universal, especially outside major, well-patrolled routes. Historians still meticulously study Roman legal texts concerning banditry. Digest provides insight into legal responses, archaeological findings of roadside ambushes and fortifications, and travelogues, those by Apuleius or Achilles Tatius, which feature numerous encounters with bandits and their grim fates to understand the precise prevalence and impact of these human threats on ancient Roman travelers, consistently confirming that it was a persistent and widespread danger, particularly for those carrying valuable goods. Furthermore, the psychological toll of constantly facing such dangers would be immense. You would live with perpetual anxiety, always scanning the horizon, always assessing strangers, always ready for a sudden attack. Sleep would be restless and fitful, plagued by nightmares of ambush and violence. This relentless stress, this knowledge that your life and livelihood could be snatched away at any moment by a human aggressor or a wild beast, would erode your spirit, leading to profound insecurity, cynicism, and a deep distrust of others. Your journey was not just a physical endeavor. It was a constant battle against human malevolence and the unforgiving wild. This relentless mental strain often transformed hardy individuals into weary, paranoid shells of their former selves, haunted by the specter of impending disaster. The vulnerability of your animals also compounded the danger. Your horses, mules, or oxen were just as susceptible to attack or illness, and their loss would be catastrophic. Their illness could delay your journey, leaving you stranded and exposed. Their death could mean the loss of transport for your valuable cargo, potentially forcing you to abandon your goods in the middle of nowhere. Protecting them was paramount, adding another layer of constant vigilance and stress to your journey, as their survival directly correlated with your own. The ultimate irony was that the very wealth you sought to acquire made you a target. Your valuable goods, intended to bring prosperity, instead attracted danger, turning you into a walking magnet for violence and exploitation. The allure of immense profit was inextricably linked to the terrifying reality of potential ruin at the hands of desperate men or the unforgiving teeth and claws of the wild, making every successful journey a testament to luck and the brutal price of survival. So, your Roman road trip was profoundly sucked by bandits and beasts lurking at every turn. The pervasive threat of highway robbery, kidnapping, and enslavement by human predators, coupled with the dangers of the wild animals and venomous creatures, ensured that every mile was a perilous gamble for your goods, your freedom, and your very life. This constant, omnipresent danger, a defining aspect of ancient travel, was a defining, profoundly horrifying aspect of taking a road trip in the Roman Empire, ensuring that your pursuit of wealth was perpetually overshadowed by the immediate, life-threatening specter of violence and chaos. Even as you evaded bandits and survived encounters with wild beasts, your Roman road trip was far from a comfortable journey. Your periods of rest were often consumed by the unsavory realities of roadside inns, which were frequently crowded, grimy, and dangerous, offering little true rest or security and making your travel profoundly sucked. Imagine arriving at a mansio, an official imperial inn, theoretically for state travelers or wealthier individuals, or a capona, a more common, often less reputable, private inn after a long, bone-jarring day of travel. You might be aching from the carriage ride, caked in dust from the road, and ravenously hungry. Your hope would be for a warm, clean bed and a decent meal, but the reality was often a stark, unpleasant contrast, a constant assault on your senses and your peace of mind. Overcrowding was a pervasive issue. These inns served as vital stopping points for all manner of travelers, soldiers on active duty or furlough, imperial couriers, long lines of merchant wagons, commoners migrating, and individual travelers like yourself. The rooms, if available for rent, would be small and cramped, often shared with multiple strangers. Privacy was a non-existent luxury. You would be constantly exposed to the snores, coughs, and restless movements of dozens of other people crammed into communal sleeping areas or even in shared rooms. Imagine trying to find a moment of personal solace or quiet sleep surrounded by dozens of unwashed, noisy strangers, their bodies aching, their anxieties palpable. The noise from the stables, the kitchen, and other guests would permeate your sleeping quarters, making restful sleep elusive and leaving you perpetually exhausted. It truly sucked to be packed like sardines in a temporary stopover. Sanitation was rudimentary at best, and often appalling. Forget clean. Tiled bathrooms or modern plumbing, latrines would be communal, often simple cesspits or holes in the ground, located away from the main buildings but rarely cleaned thoroughly, contributing to a pervasive stench that permeated the entire inn, especially on warm or humid nights. Water for personal washing would be scarce and often suspect, drawn from communal wells that could be easily contaminated by human and animal waste. Waste from kitchen's food scraps, grease and stables manure. Urine might accumulate in courtyards or drains, attracting flies and vermin. Imagine the pervasive smell of stale urine, animal dung, and unwashed bodies, mixed with cooking odors, constantly assaulting your nostrils. It truly sucked to literally breathe in everyone else's filth. Filth and unhygiene were rampant. The inn rooms, the bedding often simple straw, mattresses, or rough blankets, rarely changed or cleaned thoroughly between guests, and the communal dining areas would be grimy, dusty, and unsanitary. You would find yourself surrounded by the accumulated dirt of countless previous travelers, their sweat, their waste, and their diseases, the constant presence of fleas, lice, and bedbugs was almost guaranteed. Imagine trying to sleep, constantly itching, feeling tiny bites creeping across your body, knowing that these parasites could carry diseases and would cling to your clothes to accompany you on your continued journey. Your hope for rest would be shattered by the relentless irritation and the grim knowledge of unseen infestations. It really sucked to share your bed with vermin. The food and water offered at inns were often of questionable quality, taste, and safety, as discussed in Chapter 4. Food could be spoiled, reheated leftovers, or prepared in unsanitary kitchens, risking severe food poisoning, agonizing stomach cramps, vomiting, and debilitating dysentery. Water, drawn from communal wells, was often contaminated, making every sip a gamble with your health. The staff might be overworked, inattentive, or even outright dishonest, further compromising your comfort and safety. Imagine taking a bite of your inn meal, trying to ignore the pervasive stench, and wondering if this meal would nourish you or leave you writhing in agony on the chamber pot if you were lucky enough to have one. It really sucked to gamble your health on a roadside meal, beyond mere discomfort and unhygiene. Roman inns could be outright dangerous, particularly for a traveler carrying valuable goods or a significant amount of money. Theft, your precious goods, your money, and your personal belongings were constantly at risk. Other travelers, opportunistic staff, or even professional thieves who specifically targeted inns, knowing travelers would be exhausted and vulnerable, could attempt to steal from your room or your carriage. You would have to sleep lightly, perpetually vigilant, perhaps keeping your most valuable items close to your body or under your head. Armed guards, if you had them, would need to be constantly vigilant. Violence. Drunken brawls among travelers or local toughs were common. Arguments over rooms, food, gambling debts, or perceived insults could quickly escalate into physical altercations. Your safety depended on your own ability to defend yourself, or on the presence and willingness of your armed retinue to intervene. Criminal elements. Some inns were notorious havens for criminals, offering a convenient base for highwaymen, latrons, or local gangs. You might inadvertently find yourself sharing a common room or stable with the very bandits who preyed on travelers on the roads you had just traveled, adding a chilling layer of anxiety to your stay. The line between honest innkeeper and criminal accomplice was often blurred in less regulated areas. The reputation of Roman inns Caponii was often quite low. Roman moralists and writers like Horace, Juvenal, or Martial frequently criticized them as places of vice, debauchery, and criminality, where travelers could be robbed, defrauded, or led astray. While this might be an exaggeration driven by aristocratic disdain for common lodging, it reflects a widespread perception of inns as unreliable, often dangerous establishments, particularly for the unsuspecting or unwary. This literary and social stigma surrounding inns meant that even if you found a seemingly decent one, you would approach it with a pervasive sense of caution and distrust. It truly sucked to sleep in a den of thieves. One common misconception is that all Roman inns were part of a well-regulated, safe network akin to modern hotels. In reality, while the cursus publicus imperial post system did provide mansiones, official inns for state business military, imperial couriers, these were not always open to private travelers and still varied in quality. For the ordinary traveler, the Capona was the primary option, and their quality, safety, and hygiene were highly inconsistent and often poor, operating largely outside strict imperial regulation. Many were simple, rough establishments run by opportunistic individuals, prioritizing profit over traveler welfare, and often tolerating or even facilitating illicit activities. Historians still meticulously study archaeological findings from Roman roadside settlements, including remnants of Caponii and associated refuse pits, Various Roman literary accounts, like those in Petronius's Satyricon, which features crude inns as settings for low-life characters, and legal texts, which address crimes committed in inns to reconstruct the precise nature of these establishments and the dangers faced by travelers. Confirming the often grim reality of ancient roadside lodging. Furthermore, the psychological toll of constantly fearing for your safety, of battling infestations, and of enduring pervasive filth, even in your moments of rest, would be immense. You would live with perpetual anxiety, never truly able to relax or feel secure. The memory of your uncomfortable nights, the constant itching, the pervasive stench, and the fear of unseen threats would make every stop a source of dread rather than relief. This chronic stress, combined with poor sleep and unsanitary conditions, would rapidly erode your physical and mental resilience, contributing to a constant state of exhaustion and paranoia throughout your journey. Your attempts to recover were constantly undermined by the very environment of your lodging, turning each overnight stay into another ordeal. The lack of medical aid at inns was also critical. If you fell ill from contaminated food or water, or suffered an injury during a brawl or a robbery attempt, there was no resident physician. Your recovery would depend entirely on your own body's resilience or the limited aid from your retinue, often in unsanitary conditions that exacerbated your illness. This profound vulnerability when sick or injured, far from any real medical help, added another layer of peril to your stay. The sheer volume of traffic passing through these inns also contributed to the challenges. The constant comings and goings of people, animals, and goods meant that any cleanliness was fleeting, and the spread of rumors or dangers was amplified. You were a temporary inhabitant in a perpetually chaotic, transient environment where personal space and quiet were unimaginable luxuries. So your Roman road trip was profoundly sucked by the unsavory realities of roadside inns. These crowded, grimy, and dangerous establishments offered little true rest or security, plaguing you with unsanitary conditions, questionable food, and the constant threat of theft or violence. This pervasive squalor, ensuring your moments of respite, were often as miserable as your actual journey, was a defining, profoundly horrifying aspect of taking a road trip in the Roman Empire. Even as you, the Roman traveler, battled unsanitary inns and lurking bandits, your life on a Roman road trip was a constant, losing fight against the weather's whim. Forget climate-controlled vehicles and accurate forecasts. You were perpetually at the mercy of extreme environmental conditions, scorching heat, freezing cold, and endless rain that plagued every mile, making your travel profoundly sucked. Imagine the immense discomfort, day after day, week after week. Your journey would traverse diverse climates across the vast Roman Empire, from the Mediterranean's intense heat to the chill of Britannia or Germania, and every season brought its own unique torments. You were utterly exposed to the elements in your unsprung carriage or on foot, with no effective means of protection beyond rudimentary clothing and your dwindling endurance. Your very mode of travel offered little respite from the fury of nature. In the scorching heat of summer, particularly in regions like Italy, North Africa, e.g., modern-day Tunisia or Algeria, or the Middle East, e.g., Syria, Judea, the sun would beat down with a relentless intensity. Temperatures could soar, easily exceeding 40 degrees or 104 degrees in open areas or even within densely packed cities. The dust from the roads, as discussed in Chapter 1, churned up by countless feet and hooves, would hang thick in the air, exacerbating the stifling heat and making breathing difficult. You would sweat profusely, your body constantly trying to cool itself, rapidly losing vital fluids through perspiration. Heat stroke and severe dehydration were constant. Terrifying threats. You would feel your head pounding, your mouth parched, your vision blurring, and your muscles cramping. Collapse could come swiftly, often leading to death if you couldn't find shade or water immediately. Imagine your throat raw, your lips cracked, your body aching for a single drop of water, knowing that precious liquid was miles away or dangerously contaminated. It truly sucked to literally bake on the road, with no escape from the sun's fury. As the season shifted, the torment simply transformed. The cold of winter, particularly in northern provinces like Gaul, modern-day France, Britannia, England, or in mountainous regions like the Alps or the Balkans, brought a different, equally brutal kind of suffering. You would endure biting, icy winds that scoured the landscape, often without natural windbreaks, or slogged through deep, drifting snow that sapped your energy with every step. Your woolen tunic and cloak, while providing some basic warmth, were often insufficient against sub-zero temperatures, especially during long journeys. Sleeping in flimsy tents if you couldn't find an inn or unheated inn rooms offered little reprieve, leading to chronic chills, aches, and severe sleep deprivation. Frostbite and hypothermia were constant dangers. Your exposed fingers, toes, nose, and ears were constantly at risk of freezing, where tissue would turn numb, then painfully white, then black, leading to permanent disfigurement or the agonizing loss of digits. Hypothermia, a dangerous drop in core body temperature, could silently claim lives, turning a shivering traveler into a lifeless corpse by morning. Imagine your limbs growing numb, your body trembling uncontrollably, knowing that a moment's rest could mean freezing to death, your breath fogging in the frigid air. It really sucked to literally freeze your assets off on the road. Rain and mud were relentless tormentors, regardless of the season, in many parts of the empire, particularly in Western Europe, e.g., Gaul, Germania, Britannia. Marching or riding through prolonged periods of rain was common. Your heavy clothes, made of wool or linen, would become waterlogged and soaked, clinging uncomfortably to your skin and becoming even heavier as they absorbed moisture. The roads, even paved ones, would become slick and treacherous, increasing the risk of your carriage overturning or your horses slipping. Unpaved paths would transform into deep, sucking quagmires of mud, where your carriage wheels would sink, throwing mud and grime onto your clothes and belongings. Your journey would slow to a frustrating crawl, every step for your animals a Herculean effort. This constant dampness and filth would also lead to foot rot, skin infections, and the proliferation of lice and other parasites, further adding to your misery. Imagine slogging through knee-deep mud for miles, every step a Herculean effort, your Caligay hobnailed sandals offering little grip, and your soaked clothes leaching away your body heat. It really sucked to wade through ankle-deep mud. Day after day, the lack of effective shelter on the open road compounded these environmental dangers, while Roman mansiones official inns, primarily for state business, existed. They were often far apart, leaving vast stretches of road with no access to proper shelter from extreme weather. You might be forced to make a crude roadside camp, with only your carriage if you had one or a thin tent for protection. Utterly exposed to the full fury of the elements, this constant vulnerability to the weather, with no real escape, intensified every physical discomfort and health threat, transforming every night on the road into a desperate struggle for survival against nature's wrath. One common misconception is that Roman travel was always comfortable due to the famous Roman roads. In reality, While the roads were impressive feats of engineering, and they allowed for unprecedented speed and reliability for their time, the inherent challenges of ancient travel, lack of vehicle suspension, open carriages, limited roadside amenities, and unpredictable weather meant that journeys were almost universally uncomfortable, often brutally so. Roman authors themselves, including philosophers and poets like Seneca the Younger, who famously complained about the dust, noise, and jarring nature of travel in his letters, or Horace, who depicted the miseries of a journey to Brundisium, frequently lamented the discomforts of travel. Their personal testimony from the elite confirms the widespread nature of these miseries, demonstrating that even wealth could not fully mitigate the harsh realities of ancient travel. Historians still meticulously study ancient climate data from ice cores, tree rings, and geological records, Roman travelogues and itineraries, and archaeological findings of roadside settlements and their limited amenity to understand the precise environmental challenges faced by Roman travelers in different campaigns and regions, consistently finding evidence of widespread suffering due to the elements. Furthermore, the psychological toll of constantly battling the elements cannot be overstated. The endless sun, the biting cold, the perpetual dampness, the endless dust or mud, these would erode your spirit, leaving you perpetually fatigued, irritable, and vulnerable to despair. You lived with a constant awareness of your own insignificance in the face of such overwhelming natural power, transforming the journey into a profound existential struggle. This relentless assault from the environment itself made every mile a terrifying gamble for survival, constantly chipping away at your physical and mental resilience. Your very thoughts might revolve around the next oasis, the next patch of shade, or the next dry spot to sleep. The unpredictability of the weather was a constant source of profound anxiety. A sudden blizzard in the mountains, an unexpected sandstorm in the desert, or a flash flood in a dry riverbed could appear without warning, trapping your carriage, ruining your supplies, or leaving you stranded and utterly at the mercy of the elements. Without modern forecasting, you couldn't plan ahead for the worst. You simply reacted, often desperately, to the immediate crisis. This constant reactivity, this lack of foresight, added immense psychological strain, ensuring that the environment was a perpetual, unpredictable enemy, always ready to strike. Your journey was a continuous series of high-stakes gambles with fate. The impact on your physical health was severe and cumulative. Prolonged exposure to cold could lead to respiratory illnesses like pneumonia, chronic joint pain, rheumatism, and debilitating frostbite. Constant exposure to heat could cause heat stroke, severe dehydration, and extreme exhaustion. The dampness could lead to fungal infections like trench foot. If on foot for long periods in wet conditions, skin irritations, and overall malaise, your body, already stressed by the journey's physical demands, was constantly pushed to its limits by the environment, accelerating its decay and increasing your susceptibility to illness and injury, ensuring that a significant portion of your energy was spent simply surviving the weather itself, rather than enjoying the journey or focusing on your business. The vulnerability of your animals to the weather also compounded your misery. Your horses or mules, vital for your progress, were just as susceptible to heat stroke, hypothermia, and exhaustion. Their collapse or death due to environmental conditions would leave you stranded, your valuable goods exposed, and your journey effectively ended in the middle of nowhere. Far from any help, protecting them from the elements was paramount, adding another layer of constant vigilance and stress to your already perilous journey. So, Your Roman road trip was profoundly sucked by the weather's whim. You were perpetually at the mercy of extreme environmental conditions, scorching heat, freezing cold, and endless rain that plagued every mile, turning your journey into a constant battle for survival against the unforgiving forces of nature. This relentless assault from the elements, ensuring your profound physical discomfort and constant vulnerability, was a defining, profoundly horrifying aspect of taking a road trip in the Roman Empire. Even as you, the Roman traveler, battled nature's relentless fury and the pervasive discomfort of your journey, your passage across the vast empire was further plagued by a profound and constant challenge: communication breakdown. Forget reliable maps, clear road signs, or universal languages. Navigating vast territories without consistent guidance made you perpetually lost and uninformed, turning your road trip into a profoundly sucked ordeal. Imagine setting out from Rome, perhaps heading to distant provinces like Britannia, modern-day England, or Syria. You would carry no detailed, comprehensive map as we know it today. While the Romans had itineraries, these were often mere lists of towns and distances along a specific route, more like a basic route planner than a detailed topographical map. They rarely showed terrain features, small villages off the main road, or precise turnings. You couldn't simply pull out a scroll and pinpoint your exact location, understand complex geographical features, or anticipate upcoming detours or hazards not explicitly mentioned. Your sense of direction would rely heavily on landmarks, local knowledge if you could acquire it, and the vagaries of imprecise verbal descriptions. It truly sucked to navigate without GPS or a proper map. Lack of standardized road signs was another major hurdle. While milestones miliaria were indeed common, marking distances to major cities, usually Rome itself or the next important settlement, they rarely provided clear directional arrows for complex junctions, smaller roads branching off the main route, or warnings about local dangers, e.g., a broken bridge, a flooded ford. Imagine coming to a crossroads in a rural area with multiple unpaved tracks leading off into the wilderness, and having no clear indication of which way to go. You would be utterly reliant on asking locals, who might speak a different dialect, be unfamiliar with your ultimate destination, or even deliberately mislead you for their own benefit. This constant uncertainty about your path added immense stress to every segment of your journey. It really sucked to get lost all the time. The language barrier itself was immense and pervasive across the vast, multicultural Roman Empire. While Latin was the official language of administration, law, and the army, and the lingua franca in the western provinces, and Greek was common in the eastern provinces and often used by educated elites throughout the empire. Countless local dialects and indigenous languages were spoken in the provinces. Imagine arriving in a small village in Gaul, Dacia, or North Africa, desperately needing directions, food, or a blacksmith, and finding that no one understands your Latin. You would resort to gestures, broken phrases, and frustrated repetition, often leading to misunderstandings, delays, or being pointed in the wrong direction, sometimes even into danger. This constant struggle to communicate effectively created a profound sense of isolation and vulnerability. It truly sucked to be voiceless in a foreign land. No reliable interpreters, unless you were a very wealthy merchant who could afford a dedicated multilingual interpreter in your retinue. You were largely on your own. Local interpreters, if found in mansiones or capannae, might be unreliable, dishonest, or simply poor at translating complex concepts, further compounding the communication breakdown and leaving you vulnerable to fraud or misunderstanding. Dialect variations, even within regions that ostensibly spoke a common language like Latin or Greek, local dialects and accents could vary significantly. making comprehension difficult and misunderstandings frequent. This linguistic diversity, while culturally rich, was a logistical nightmare for a traveler seeking clear information. The lack of real-time information meant you were almost always uninformed about immediate conditions on the road ahead. Beyond what you could observe directly, there were no accurate long-range weather forecasts, no traffic reports, no warnings about bandit activity until it was too late, no news of local unrest, or reports of road damage, e.g., a washed-out bridge, a landslide blocking a mountain pass. You might set out thinking a path was safe, only to encounter a major obstacle, a bandit ambush, or a sudden tribal conflict, all without prior warning. Your journey was a series of unpredictable gambles, relying on outdated information, if any, or sheer, terrifying luck. It truly sucked to fly blind. This perpetual state of being lost and uninformed contributed to immense psychological stress. The constant anxiety about taking a wrong turn, running out of supplies in unknown territory, stumbling into danger like a hostile village or a bandit hideout, or simply becoming hopelessly lost, would gnaw at your peace of mind. You would live with perpetual frustration at delays caused by misunderstanding directions, and a nagging, ever-present fear of the unknown. Sleep would be restless, plagued by nightmares of getting hopelessly lost in a vast, indifferent landscape. This relentless mental strain, this constant battle against uncertainty, eroded your spirit, leaving you perpetually exhausted, disoriented, and often profoundly paranoid. Your journey was not just a physical endeavor, it was a profound psychological ordeal of constant navigation under conditions of extreme ignorance. The threat of misinformation or deliberate deception was always present. A dishonest innkeeper might misdirect you to a rival establishment or send you on a longer, more dangerous route to exploit your desperation. A desperate local, eager for a quick profit, might give you wrong directions to lead you into a trap or an ambush without reliable maps or clear signs. Verifying information was incredibly difficult, leaving you vulnerable to malicious guidance. This added another layer of profound psychological pressure, making you distrustful of every stranger offering help, even if their intentions were good. The lack of assistance for the lost or stranded was stark. If your carriage broke down in a remote area, if your animals collapsed, or if you got hopelessly lost, there was no roadside assistance, no emergency services, and no reliable way to call for help. Your survival would depend entirely on your own resourcefulness, your remaining supplies, and the rare, fortuitous encounter with another, sympathetic traveler. This profound vulnerability when disoriented or in distress added another chilling layer of peril to the already difficult conditions of travel, ensuring that even a simple wrong turn could turn into a life-threatening crisis. The ultimate irony was that the very vastness of the Roman Empire, a testament to its power and conquest, also contributed to the overwhelming challenge of communication and navigation. As you traveled further from Rome, the familiar landmarks and the pervasive Latin culture would slowly fade, replaced by increasingly diverse and alien territories. Exacerbating your sense of being lost and uninformed, your journey became a constant reminder of the empire's sprawling, uncontrollable diversity, making you feel like a small, vulnerable speck in an immense, often bewildering world. One common misconception is that the Roman Empire's impressive road network made travel effortless and easily navigable for everyone. While the roads certainly facilitated movement and were a major improvement over earlier eras, the inherent limitations of ancient communication technology, no printing for mass-produced, detailed maps, no electronic signals, No standardized signage across all routes meant that navigating complex routes, especially across diverse linguistic and cultural regions, remained a significant challenge for all but the most experienced imperial couriers or seasoned military commanders who had explicit, detailed itineraries. The Roman state primarily focused on military and administrative communication, not civilian ease of navigation. Historians still meticulously study Roman itineraries like the Tabula Peutingeriana, a surviving medieval copy of a Roman road map of the world, though not a modern topographical map, milestones miliaria, and various Roman travelogues, e.g., those by Apuleius in the Golden Ass, or the Itinerarium Burdigalense, a pilgrim's account to understand the precise navigational challenges faced by travelers and how they compensated for the lack of modern mapping and signage, consistently revealing a reliance on local guides, verbal directions, and sheer ingenuity, often with considerable difficulty and frequent misdirection. Furthermore, the lack of a strong central authority that standardized language and signage across the entire empire meant that these communication challenges were endemic. While Latin and Greek served as linguae francae for administration and elite culture, they did not erase the myriad local languages and dialects that everyday people spoke, creating a constant barrier for travelers. This linguistic patchwork, while adding cultural richness, was a practical nightmare for those trying to find their way. The psychological impact of this constant disorientation and communication breakdown would be immense and cumulative. You would live with perpetual frustration at the lack of progress, the constant feeling of being stuck, and the knowledge that your destination was still weeks away. Homesickness, anxiety about your distant affairs, and the sheer mental exhaustion of continuous, unvarying travel, punctuated by moments of confusion and fear, would erode your spirit. Your journey, meant to connect you to distant places, would instead transform into a prolonged test of patience, physically jarring and mentally draining, with your mind constantly battling the unknown, this profound uncertainty. This constant battle against becoming lost was a major source of stress that defined your entire Roman road trip. So, your Roman road trip was profoundly sucked by pervasive communication breakdown, the lack of reliable maps, clear road signs, and universal language left you constantly lost and uninformed, struggling to navigate vast, unfamiliar territories. This relentless uncertainty, coupled with the profound psychological toll of constant anxiety and paranoia, was a defining, profoundly horrifying aspect of taking a road trip in the Roman Empire, ensuring that your pursuit of your destination was a continuous, mentally exhausting, and often bewildering ordeal, making every mile a terrifying leap into the unknown. Even as your spirit wrestled with the confusion of communication breakdowns and the constant fear of getting lost, your Roman road trip was perpetually burdened by an insidious and pervasive reality. The cost, forget budget travel or cheap gas, the immense financial burden and logistical nightmares of ancient travel made it a luxury for the privileged few, turning your journey into a profoundly sucked ordeal. Imagine the sheer financial outlay required before you even set foot on the road. This wasn't a simple booking. It was a substantial investment, consuming a significant portion of your wealth, or even plunging you into debt. The allure of distant trade or family duty might compel you, but the monetary demands were relentless and often unpredictable. Transportation costs, whether you owned a carriage or hired one, the expenses were immense. A well-built carica carriage or Rata heavy wagon could be incredibly expensive. Akin to buying a luxury car today, maintaining the carriage repairs, wheel replacements, axle grease, feeding and stabling the horses or mules along the route, and paying for their specialized care were continuous, high expenses. If you hired a vehicle and a driver, the daily rates would quickly accumulate, especially for multi-day or multi-week journeys. Imagine pouring a significant portion of your capital just into the means of travel, knowing that every mile literally cost you money. It truly sucked to pay a fortune just to get around. Retinue expenses. You wouldn't travel alone, especially if you were a wealthy citizen or carrying valuable goods. You would need to hire a retinue of slaves or freedmen as drivers, guards, porters, and personal assistants. You were responsible for their wages if freedmen, food, lodging, and even their equipment. The larger and better armed your retinue, the safer you might be, as discussed in Chapter 5 regarding bandits. But the more astronomically expensive your journey became, imagine supporting an entire mini household of a dozen or more people, including their daily sustenance and any unexpected medical costs, just to accompany you on a trip. It truly sucked to have an entourage that broke the bank. Provisions carrying enough food and water for yourself, your retinue, and your animals for days or weeks was a colossal logistical challenge and a significant expense. While some items were basic, bulk purchases added up. Any specialized or preserved foods, dried fruits. Quality wine would be costly. You couldn't rely solely on foraging or local purchases, as supplies were often unreliable and prices unpredictable. Lodging and fodder. Overnight stays at roadside inns, mansions, or kaponi meant paying for rooms, meals, and crucially, fodder for your animals. These costs, while seemingly small per night, would quickly accumulate over a long journey. The quality of these inns was often poor, as explored in Chapter 6, yet you had no choice but to pay for their meager amenities, tolls, and taxes. While major Roman roads were often free of direct tolls as they were built by the state for military and administrative purposes, you might still encounter various local levies, customs duties at provincial borders, or even informal fees or bribes demanded by corrupt officials or local strongmen. Particularly in less controlled regions, these unexpected costs could quickly eat into your budget, and refusing to pay could lead to costly delays or the confiscation of your goods, beyond the upfront and ongoing costs. Your journey was plagued by logistical nightmares that further drained your resources and consumed your precious time. Delays, breakdowns of your carriage, illness among your retinue or animals, severe weather as discussed in Chapter 7, or simply getting lost as explored in Chapter 8 could cause immense, unplanned delays. Every unforeseen stop meant additional days or weeks of paying for lodging, food, and fodder, rapidly escalating your expenses. A journey planned for 2 weeks could easily stretch into a month or more, doubling your costs without any corresponding progress towards your destination. Your financial planning, however meticulous, was constantly at the mercy of unpredictable events. It truly sucked to be stuck and paying for it. Loss or damage to goods for merchants. This was the ultimate financial peril. Your precious cargo, whether valuable silks from the East, exotic spices, fine wines, or luxury goods, was constantly vulnerable to damage from the rough roads, spoilage due to heat or dampness, or theft by bandits, a broken amphora of wine, a bale of silk soaked by rain, or a crate of spices infested by pests. Any damage, however small, represented a direct loss of profit, chipping away at your already precarious margins. Imagine arriving at a distant market, only to find a third of your goods ruined by unexpected conditions or stolen by bandits, your anticipated fortune vanishing before your eyes. It truly sucked to literally watch your money spoil. Replacements. If a horse died, a wheel broke beyond repair, or vital equipment was lost or stolen, Replacing it on the road would be incredibly expensive and time-consuming. Further delaying your journey and compounding your financial woes, you were often at the mercy of local prices in remote areas, which could be exorbitant due to their isolation. This unforeseen need for replacements could quickly decimate your remaining capital. The overall economic cost of Roman travel meant it was a luxury largely confined to the wealthy elite senators, equestrians, powerful merchants, and imperial officials. For the vast majority of Romans, extensive long-distance travel was an unattainable dream, simply too expensive and too perilous. A common peasant might spend their entire life within a few miles of their village, never seeing the famous roads or the distant cities of the empire, precisely because the cost was prohibitive. Your very ability to travel was a mark of your privilege, but it came with the heavy financial burden that was hidden from the masses. It truly sucked that only the rich could travel long distances. One common misconception is that the Roman Empire's sophisticated infrastructure made travel universally accessible and affordable for everyone, while the roads allowed for unprecedented speed and reliability for their time. The inherent economic realities of ancient travel, high costs of transport, provisioning, security, and accommodation meant that it remained largely the domain of the wealthy, the military, or those compelled by state business. The average Roman citizen or peasant would rarely undertake long-distance journeys unless absolutely necessary, e.g., forced migration, military conscription due to the prohibitive expenses and dangers. Historians still meticulously study Roman itineraries, customs, manifests, and household accounts when surviving to understand the precise costs of various types of ancient travel and the social strata that could afford it, consistently finding it to be a privilege of the elite and a significant financial undertaking even for them. Furthermore, the opportunity cost of your time spent traveling was immense. Weeks or months on the road meant your capital was tied up for extended periods, delaying your profits and limiting the number of trade cycles you could complete in a year. For a citizen traveling for personal reasons, it meant prolonged absence from your home, family, and business affairs, disrupting your life and potentially incurring costs or losses. This lost opportunity, this consumption of precious time that could have been spent on other productive endeavors, was a significant, unquantifiable cost that further eroded the financial benefit of travel. You were literally losing money by being on the road. The psychological toll of this constant financial strain and the endless logistical nightmares would be immense. You would live with perpetual anxiety about expenses, about potential losses, and about unexpected delays that could derail your entire venture, the knowledge that your family's future, your personal honor, and your very livelihood rested on unpredictable market shifts, the vulnerability of your cargo, and the potential for unforeseen calamities would create a profound sense of stress and paranoia. Every profit was hard-won and fleeting, every loss devastating, ensuring that your journey was not just physically arduous, but a relentless psychological torment driven by financial desperation. Your dreams of immense wealth were constantly overshadowed by the specter of utter ruin, making every mile a step closer to potential destitution. The sheer vulnerability to fraud and exploitation from innkeepers, local guides, and even your own retinue, if they were dishonest, added another layer of financial peril. They knew you were dependent on them, especially in remote areas, and they might inflate prices, offer substandard services, or even conspire to rob you, knowing your recourse was limited far from home. This constant need for vigilance against financial trickery added to your mental burden, making every transaction a potential pitfall. The reliance on a credit system or loans to finance these expensive journeys was common, especially for merchants. This often meant dealing with moneylenders who charged exorbitant interest rates, plunging you into a spiraling cycle of debt that could haunt you for years. Even if your journey was successful, the promise of future profits was constantly eaten away by the burden of past loans, ensuring that true financial freedom remained an elusive dream. So your Roman road trip was profoundly sucked by its immense cost. The astronomical expenses of transportation, retinues, and provisions, coupled with the constant threat of delays, damage to goods, and exploitation, ensured a continuous financial burden. This profound economic strain, making extensive travel a luxury for few and a ruinous gamble for many, was a defining, profoundly horrifying aspect of taking a road trip in the Roman Empire, ensuring that your pursuit of your destination was perpetually overshadowed by the chilling specter of financial ruin. You've endured the bone-jarring reality of the fabled Roman roads, suffered the agonizingly slow pace of travel, been battered by the uncomfortable carucha, risked illness from contaminated food and squalid inns, battled bandits and beasts, weathered the extreme wrath of the weather, struggled through communication breakdowns, and been plagued by the immense financial burden of the journey. As the distant rumble of ancient wheels fades and the phantom ache in your bones finally dissipates, a profound, lingering truth settles upon you. Taking a road trip in the Roman Empire was not a leisurely vacation. It was a physically brutal, mentally exhausting, and often dangerous ordeal, ensuring your supposed adventure was, in fact, a deeply sucked experience. Physical torment. A body battered by travel. Consider the relentless physical assault that defined every mile of your journey. Your body absorbed constant jarring from unsuspended carriages on uneven roads, leading to chronic aches, bruising, and joint pain. You battled extreme heat that caused heat stroke and dehydration, or freezing cold that risked hypothermia and frostbite. Your clothes were perpetually caked in dust or soaked in mud. Every day was a test of endurance against physical discomfort and environmental extremes. With your body, your primary means of transport, systematically worn down by the very act of travel, it truly sucked to physically suffer for weeks or months on end, with no real respite, pervasive danger, a high-stakes gamble. Then there's the pervasive danger and profound insecurity. The roads, despite imperial efforts, were rife with human predators, bandits who could ambush, rob, kidnap, or enslave you. Wild animals added another layer of primal fear. Unsanitary inns and contaminated food and water sources were constant threats, leading to debilitating and often fatal diseases like dysentery and typhoid. You were perpetually vigilant, constantly aware that your life, your freedom, and your fortune could be snatched away at any moment by human malevolence, natural disaster, or unseen microbes. Your adventure was a continuous, high-stakes gamble with peril, where death lurked around every bend in the road, crushing mental toll lost, paranoid, and drained. And what about the crushing mental and emotional toll, the agonizingly slow pace of travel, stretching weeks into months, bred profound boredom and frustration? The lack of reliable maps or a universal language left you perpetually lost and disoriented, creating immense anxiety and paranoia. You lived in a constant state of hypervigilance, unable to truly relax or trust strangers. This relentless mental strain, coupled with physical exhaustion and deep homesickness, eroded your spirit, leaving you weary, jaded, and often profoundly isolated. Even when surrounded by your retinue, it truly sucked to pay for your journey with your sanity. Day by agonizing day, Economic ruin, luxury at a punishing price. Finally, the immense, debilitating cost, far from being accessible. Extensive travel was a luxury reserved for the very wealthy, who still bore its immense financial burden. The astronomical costs of transportation carriages, animals, retinues, guards, drivers, porters, and provisions food, water, fodder, coupled with the constant threat of delays, damage to goods, and exploitation by unscrupulous innkeepers or officials, could bankrupt even prosperous individuals. For a merchant, weeks or months on the road meant tied-up capital and the terrifying risk of losing everything to market fluctuations or damaged goods. This economic pressure added another layer of anxiety to an already arduous journey, ensuring that the pursuit of profit was shadowed by the specter of utter ruin. Your wealth literally evaporated with every mile, making the journey a financial bleeding. The road's true legacy beyond engineering marvels, the very concept of a road trip in ancient Rome, a symbol of freedom and connection in modern times, was for its inhabitants a stark contrast. The famous Roman road network, while an unparalleled feat of ancient engineering that allowed for unprecedented military movement and trade, did not translate into comfort or ease for the common traveler. Its durability and strategic purpose came at the cost of passenger well-being. The grandeur of the roads merely highlighted the immense suffering of those who traversed them, ensuring that every mile gained by the Roman Empire was literally paved with the aches, pains, and anxieties of its weary travelers, whose journeys were far from luxurious. The psychological scar, a journey's lingering burden, one particularly poignant and often overlooked. Detail is the psychological impact of return. After months or years of enduring such brutal conditions, the constant danger, the perpetual discomfort, the profound isolation, the moral compromises forced by desperation reintegrating into the seemingly mundane comforts of civilian life could be deeply disorienting. The returning traveler would carry invisible scars, a heightened sense of vigilance, a deep appreciation for basic amenities like a clean, still bed or pure water, and a perhaps jaded perspective on the civilized world, having witnessed firsthand the brutal realities of the roads and human nature under duress. Their understanding of the empire and its underlying harshness would be uniquely shaped by the hardships endured, distinguishing them forever from those who never left home. This profound transformation, a kind of traveler's trauma, made the journey a lifelong burden, even after its physical conclusion. Historians still meticulously study Roman philosophical texts, which often feature reflections on travel and its challenges. e.g., Seneca's letters to Lucilius lamenting the miseries of travel, travelogues by military figures or merchants like those detailed in Apuleius's The Golden Ass or the Itinerarium Bourde Galens, and the concept of nostos return in ancient literature to understand the precise psychological impact of long-distance journeys on individuals in the Roman world, confirming the lasting mental and emotional toll. Ultimately, your experience of what sucked about taking a road trip in the Roman Empire was a profound, continuous ordeal. It was a grueling test of physical endurance, mental resilience, and sheer luck, where every mile brought new miseries, a jarring ride, suffocating dust, extreme weather, contaminated food, lurking bandits, and pervasive disease. This relentless assault on your body, mind, and finances ensured that your supposed adventure was, in fact, a deeply sucked experience. Far from any romanticized notion of ancient travel, and leaving a lasting legacy of aches, anxieties, and profound exhaustion, as you now drift into a deep, comforting sleep. Let the distant rumble of ancient wheels and the imagined aches of your journey finally subside. You are safe, in your own time, far removed from the brutal realities of ancient travel. May your dreams be peaceful, filled with the quiet certainty of smooth roads, comfortable seats, clean food, and the profound freedom of effortless movement. A stark contrast to the sucky truth we've explored tonight. And now, good night, and have sweet dreams.